Good evening, folks. My name is Michael, and on behalf of Stark's Funeral Home, we'd like to thank you all for being here to honor Bob and be here for Susan and the rest of the family. I know they appreciate you all being here. We're going to have a couple of speeches now, starting with Bob's sister Karen, and then we'll have Alan Madsen, a good friend, as well as Gary Sperling, and then Bob's stepdaughter Carolyn will give the final speech, and then we're going to open it up, an open invite for anybody who'd like to speak. So without further ado, I will introduce you to Karen Kelly.
A complicated guy. Robert Lynn Edwards was born October 22nd, 1949, and was named after his uncle Robert Page, who was killed in World War II. Brought home to his Rose Park home to meet his forever after annoying sister. Dubbed Bobby by his parents, Cliff and June, a name he has been known by his entire life by family and lifetime friends. A chubby, freckled-faced kid, his whole world was that Rose Park neighborhood. Friends were made there, and in high school, that lasted a lifetime. Friends were very, very important to him. Except for his military service in the Marines and a stint in Saudi Arabia, he never ventured too far for too long from where he grew up. Known to be somewhat directionally challenged, we were sure that was the reason he stayed close to his roots, so he could always see a familiar landmark. A complicated guy. Very much the intellect, loving to read, he could talk to most anyone about most anything. However, the one thing he did not talk much about was himself. It is said that when an older person dies, a library burns. In Bobby's case, it would be more like the Library of Congress. A complicated guy. I cannot tell you what it's like to be Bobby's friend, brother, wife, in-law, neighbor, or any other relationship you might have had with him. But I can tell you what it was like to be his only sister. Complicated. Attached to a money clip given to his brother-in-law many years ago was a note that could have been Bobby's tenant. In his own words, quote, $1 too much, a card without limit, and a good woman. It doesn't get any better than this. Bobby had all of this. Bobby lived the last years of his life bravely, with endurance, and no self-pity. His favorite time of day was sunrise. We picture him going to his next sunrise, a book in one hand and the Wall Street Journal in the other. His family chooses to remember how hard he fought to stay himself, a complicated guy.
I'm one of those that try to discover Bob. I've known Bob, I was figuring out, I've known him since kindergarten, that's 68 years ago. And I really don't know, I'm almost embarrassed the fact of how little I know about Bob. Anyway, there were large gaps in our association that our relationship started in kindergarten and ended just a few days ago. This friendship was interrupted by my years away from Utah and Ohio, Bountiful, and Alaska, and Bob's time away in Saudi Arabia, the Marines in California and Hawaii. But that time was still small in comparison to those passing 68 years. The only explanation I have for that lack of knowing more about Bob is the fact that he never wanted to talk about Bob. He always wanted to talk about you and what you had been doing. He always had a way of changing the conversation away from himself, it seems. I've had the conversation with others about Bob, and I'm sure he was in the CIA because of all the secrecy of his trips away from Salt Lake that he never would talk about. With his background of time in Saudi Arabia and the Marines, it was just a natural fit. There'd be a CIA agent and couldn't talk about it, or maybe not. Enough about what I don't know. Here's what I do know. He was a leader. He had an October birth date, and Bob was always the oldest of the class. I wondered if that didn't have an effect that caused him to act like the older brother his whole life. He was always the calming one that stopped the fights and to lead everyone the right direction. Whatever the cause, everyone in our class looked to him as an example of what they would like to be and selected him as sophomore class president of our first year at West High. The yearbook read, "Ubulant Bob Edwards displayed a serious side whenever responsibility was given to him." That statement seemed to me to be right on. He also led the football team as quarterback, although the season didn't quite end the way he had hoped with, you had 0-8. It was 0-9. Sorry. I looked it up. Very smart guy. He was always the top of the class, though, in school, throughout school, earning the award of Sterling Scholar our senior year in high school, but all throughout kindergarten through high school, he was the smart guy in the class. And you always wondered how he did it. How smart, you ask? Who would join the Marines during the Vietnam War at all when everyone else was trying to find a way to stay away from Vietnam? Only Bob would, and then he finds a way to become a reporter, photographer, journalist in California and Hawaii. He said there were times while he was in Hawaii that he worried the Marines had forgotten about him. That is smart. Bob was one who was much more interested in caring of others than himself. You ask anyone who knew him and they would agree that he would always change the subject to them whenever the conversation turned to him, as Karen said. You always had these questions about him and what he was doing, and when the conversation ended and you walked away, you still did not know a thing about him. I always came away feeling like you had just been interviewed, and I think that came from his journalistic days and probably because of his reporting background, but mostly his concern and interest in all of us. The one thing that he did get from conversations with him is his love and concern for his family and friends. He always showed concern for his mother, June, and how she could continue to care for herself on her own on Oakley Street. Her last few years, you could tell, were really a concern for him. He was asking me questions about my own mother and the type of care that she was getting and what I thought about moving June away from her own home to a care facility. That was really eating at him, you could tell. He was so proud of Susan's daughter and those two grandchildren. When it came down to choosing between seeing them and caring for them or doing something with me, I knew right away what his choice would be, and the right choice he made. Does anyone know what Bob's favorite sport is? I found out quickly that it was whatever the grandkids were doing at the time. You never ever heard anything from him about the latest college or professional sports team and how they were doing, but you knew about the soccer game that he had just gone to. Speaking of sports, I don't think that Bob ever really got excited about or thought of sports like I did. Bob spoke of sports as though they were a way to get exercise and get in shape, not a competitive event. Who cares about the score? Bob was one of the most popular individuals in school, elementary, junior high, and high school. Dated all the most popular girls in school, but never just one for very long. Never seemed to want to get that deeply involved with just one person. How'd you do it, Susan? I saw his wood shop on what I believe was Hillside or Second North. Anyway, it was nice, but not really much really. If I were to guess, I wouldn't think that he made a nickel being a woodworker, however. It looked like more of a hobby than a career, and he had an amazing wooden box of antique woodworking tools that he was and should have been very proud of. However, maybe that was what made him a woodworker. However, he was his own boss. Bob watched all the popular TV shows as long as they were on PBS. He was always telling me about something that was coming up on that, and he watched on PBS that I should be seeing. He was a reader and a watcher of history. There were always books I should read that he just finished that it would be interesting, and most of the time he was right on. He once gave me a copy of a book called A Voyage for Mad Men, and he wrote inside, "For Al." Probably the only Rose Park Elementary graduate who could complete such a race. Best wishes, Bob. July 2001. Not sure that he was right, but it was a nice compliment. This I also know. Tuesday lunch bunch has dwindled. And we're certainly going to miss, but you will not be forgotten. Rest in peace. I love you, man. Talk to Pinky, his good buddy from Oregon. He wanted me to tell you, Bob always enjoyed playing chess. We played a bunch of times in our teens. He was a solid player. He talked me into skydiving, and we jumped 3 times. When he finished the Marine Corps training, he carried the troop flag, the flag indicating that he was a top graduate of the troop. You know, I missed something here. And that was I used to run into Bob nearly every day sometime early on in my career and his. after he left the Marines, and with his small nest egg. Who goes most of their life without a boss or two? That would be Bob. Other than his stint in the Marines and a short career with Northrop in Saudi Arabia, he never had a boss. Of course, unless you count Susan under that category. As was stated in his obituary, Bob was his own man. Bob was definitely his own man. I don't remember of him working while going to school. He was too busy with academics and sports. How do you go that long without a boss? By being your own man. As it was also stated in the obituary, while Bob was in Saudi Arabia, he accumulated a little nest egg, even though I would wonder how much of it was earned in a poker game. I think that was overrated, but it was a little nest egg. Then Bob spent the next several years developing that little nest egg, and it cracked open to become something much different. Since I was working downtown in the Kennecott building around that same time, I would see Bob on the way to or from Merrill Lynch each morning. He would spend the early morning at Merrill Lynch managing the little nest egg and go to the Deseret Gym for a little exercise, and then would go back to Merrill Lynch until the market closed. That's how you go without having a boss, I guess. Love you, Bob. Thanks.
I'm going to attempt a trick I learned from my kids to keep a few notes here. I've discovered by becoming one that old men tend to get a little bit sentimental, so I'm going to do the best I can with this and hope my voice works for me. I've always wanted to hang around with people who are smarter than I am, and in that regard, Booby was unquestionably fun to be with, because he certainly was one of the smarter people I've met. And I didn't pronounce his name, Booby, from Bobby. He was renamed. Alan mentioned the Marines, and a real good friend of mine, excuse me, got drafted in the Marines about the same time that Booby joined the Marines. And as Alan alluded to, strangely enough, at the height of the Vietnam War, they both ended up in Hawaii and became good friends. And so my friend Jim brought Booby back to Taylorville, and we all became pretty close. And I should explain after that, the booby comes from the blue-footed booby bird, which is in Hawaii, and my friend Jim, for some reason, saw a connection or a similarity between the blue-footed booby bird and the guy you know as Bob Edwards. And so in Illinois, he has always been known as Booby. Got just a couple of little things that are kind of fun. He came out there quite a bit. We came out here some. And he called one time and said, I'm going to come to Taylorville. I said, fine. He said, I'm going to ride my bicycle. I said, fine. So a week or so later, I get another call. And it's Booby, and he's in Denver. And he said, you got to pick me up at the bus station in St. Louis. I said, okay. I said, I thought you were riding your bike out. He said, well, I can't ride it out. I lost my shoes. And I said, why don't you buy another pair of shoes? And he said, well, it takes about a month to break them in. And I haven't got time, so I'm riding the bus. I said, okay. So I went to St. Louis at the appointed time, and I walked in. It's a pretty good-sized bus station in St. Louis. And I walked in looking for Booby, and I didn't have to look long. I saw a guy standing in the middle of the bus station in bright red sweatsuit and sandals with a little knapsack. And that was Booby. So, and it's been said that he was a man of few words to some degree, and when he came out, we went to Beardstown, and we were hunting squirrels and camping in the woods, and this happened to be a pretty big oak timber that we were in, and the trees had acorns just maybe a little smaller than a golf ball. And we were all sitting around the fire, and Booby picked up an acorn and looked at it, and he said, "Can you eat these?" We said, "Yeah." And he took a big bite, spit it out. He said, "These are awful." We said, "Yeah." And then that same trip, while we were sitting there, a little snake came out. And I think out here, you folks think a little different about snakes, like rattlesnakes and things like that. And in our part of Illinois, there are virtually no poisonous snakes. And so another guy with us was one of our buddies, Dave Curry, was there. And that snake came out and raised its head up and stuck its tongue out like snakes do. And Davey looked at that and walked over there and smacked that snake and said, "Don't stick your tongue out at me, snake." Well, I turned around, Booby was backed up against an oak tree. He was just sure Davey was about to die. So, but we had a lot of good times, and I haven't met anybody else like him. I just feel very privileged to have been a friend.
First of all, thank you all so much for being here tonight. It's wonderful to see you. It's under tough circumstances, but I'm glad we can be together and bring together these memories of Bob and some of the wonderful times we had together. And through these talks, something I had already been thinking about was people have so many different facets, so many different personas, and you've heard about some of his younger friends, and so I'm talking tonight more about Bob, who is my stepdad, and Bob, who was our morfar to Gabe and Linnea. Although I knew Bob for most of my life, we didn't really spend a lot of time together until I was about 12. And as you can imagine, a 12-year-old girl is not the easiest person to get to know when she first moves out. And I wanted to think of what were some of the core memories that we had together, and what are the lessons that I brought from our relationship, and just share a few of those memories with you all. And the first one was about a love of nature. And you see through some of these pictures how much he loved to be outside, how much he loved the mountains. And I remember as a little kid, we would nap so that we could stay up late and go watch the Paracid meteor shower, which is, I think, happening just about now. And we'd go out to the West Desert, and we would take those banana folding chairs, if you remember those, where you have to fold it all the way in, and then you kind of get it to the right place, but it's not quite the right place, so you have to fold it in again. And so we'd lay out there under the sky in our sleeping bags, kind of freezing, but just sort of talking and watching all of the shooting stars going across the sky. And that's just one of those times where I feel like I had an impression of wonder and love of nature and how wonderful the world is, and I'm glad to have shared that with him. A second memory is a little bit a harder one. Bob had been driving me and my friends in the car somewhere, and we were chatting in the back seat, and after they got out, he turned to me and said, "Don't be catty. If you can't see something in front of someone, you shouldn't be saying it at all." And I'm sure at the time, I was very indignant and angry, but in retrospect, I'm really glad he called me out on that. And I know personal integrity was such an important part, and honesty was such an important part of his life and what he emulated. And he really instilled that in me, and I've tried to keep that as something that I live my life by and respect others and embrace that personal integrity that he had too. And the last thing I thought of, which it was so funny after listening to some of the other speakers, was we talked often about the art of conversation. And for anyone who's chatted with him, you know that one of the wonderful things is he was full of stories. And he was so well read, he knew so many things. He shared so many ideas and stories with people. But what made him a wonderful conversationalist was that he loved to listen. And he loved to be interested in what you had to say. And he told me, Carolyn, people love to talk about themselves. And if you are genuinely interested in them and you ask questions and listen to them, they will value you very much as a friend. And I've taken that to heart, and I can see how much he practiced that in his life and with his friends. So I loved hearing some of those stories. So those are just some of the things that I thought of Bob as my stepdad. But Bob as morfar was also a really important part of his life and of my life. So morfar means mother's father in Swedish. And they have a tradition where the mother's family is mormor, mother's mother, and morfar, mother's father. And when we were expecting Gabe, we talked about, well, what do you want the kids to call you? And we decided on mormor and morfar. And I don't think he had any idea what being a morfar really meant. Because as I told you, I was like 12 when I really was living in the same house as him. So he didn't see that amazing transition of someone who's almost just a concept, you know, a pregnancy, and then you have this helpless little lump that is so precious. And watching that grow, you know, watching Gabe and Linnea grow into these fun, rambunctious, loud. He didn't like loud that much, so you can know how much he loved them. Watching them grow into these fun people and into wonderful young adults. And he was so very proud of them, as all of his friends probably heard. But he was also such a patient person with them. So such patience I didn't know that he had in him. And if Gabe wanted to pick up rocks and put them in piles for hours on end, then he would pick up rocks and put them in piles for hours on end. And if Linnea wanted to heal all of his, you know, his stomach ache and his headache and his broken arm and his broken leg and his appendix, or whatever they wanted to play, you know, he'd be on the couch letting her administer medicine and wrap his arm and take care of him. So it was wonderful to see that side of him with them, and I think he enjoyed it tremendously to see them grow and develop into wonderful, wonderful people. As his illness was harder, he couldn't do as many things, but sometimes it was enough to just sit in the TV room and watch them playing games and talk to them about it and just be present, just be together, just know that he was there and he was always on their side. So I'm so grateful that they had that experience, and I know, Gabe and Linnea, a lot of your memories will be from when you were smaller, but I hope you always feel the unconditional love that he had for you and how very proud he was of the people you're becoming. And I hope you can take some of those lessons that I can pass down from him with the love of nature and personal responsibility and integrity and being a great conversationalist and a good friend, because he really helped teach me that. So thank you once again for being here. I think we were going to have a toast. Okay. So we'll bring around a drink and raise a glass to Bob Edwards.
We're having a Coke or champagne toast. And then it is also open for anyone else who wants to make a
Just say a few words.
That was beautiful.
Thank you so Just a toast to Bob, a complicated man, a good friend, a lover of nature, and a lover of his friends and family. To Bob. And to Bobby, as his family knows him, and to Booty. Thank you all for coming. Each and every one of you were special to him. Anybody else? Open forum?
I'll tell one more just short story. For a long time, Booby and I would Skype, and he one time told me that, I don't know what we were talking about, but I knew that he did a lot of his work at home on the computer and so forth, and he said, you know, Gabe was talking to me. I bet you're Gabe, right? Okay. Said Gabe was talking, and he told everybody, or he asked me, he said, Morfar, how come everybody else goes to work every day and you just sit here and watch TV?
If they don't have a job? No. If they have a job. If they have a job. They're giving investment advice. Maybe don't trust that. Right? Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the comics that he put up on the fridge.
Bob actually had one other nickname. Anybody know him as Fabrizio?
I think it's just you.
Maybe just me. Late high school and early college. Huh? Alan may know. Late high school and early college, we would jump in our truck and Friday night go the weekend up what's called the Upper Stillwater. And to get there, you went through Francis, over Wolf Creek Pass, and came to Hanna and Tabiona. Everybody know where Hanna and Tabiona are. Well, we'd go to Hanna to get a drink or something, and we look around. Fabrizio's General Store, Fabrizio's gas station, Fabrizio's Hotel. Every building on the street was Fabrizio's something. So we went many, many times. So Bob's in the Marines. Haven't seen him forever. I look in the newspaper one day. Tabiona had played Camus or somebody, and there was a box score. And the box score for Tabiona was Bill Fabrizio, Steve Fabrizio, John Fabrizio, Eric Fabrizio, and Danny Fabrizio. Every kid on the team was a Fabrizio. So I cut out the little box score, send it to Private Edwards, nothing else, nothing. A year later, I get a box score back. Fabrizio, Fabrizio, Fabrizio. So when he called me up, he'd leave a message, "This is Fabrizio, call me."
I did not know that last part.
Anyone else? Ah, very good.
I would just like to say that my husband Gary met Bob through a mutual friend in Taylorville, Illinois. And last night we had the privilege of meeting Pat and Kim. And today I met some of Bob and Susan's neighbors. And I hope that everybody will stick around because we want to know more. I mean, we love Bob and Susan and your family. And we love hearing the stories. We met Alan too. I forgot you, Alan. That was great. So I hope you'll stick around and tell us what you know about Bob. Thank you.
I've got somebody's notes here. I think I'm just going to go with this. No. No. Just representing Bob and some of his Rose Park colleagues and buddies from way back with Alan and many others. There are many that wish they'd love to be here tonight. Bob was well respected, well loved by all of us. From West High School, class of '67, I would just say we've lost a dear friend and colleague. Just a couple of brief memories. I was in the same kindergarten class with Bob and all through school. He was just always loyal and terrific. I'll just share one thing that we did have in common. He was a listener, a great listener. Through my training and mental health experience, I was a listener. So when we got together for lunches, I was able to interrogate him a little bit. And people usually paid me to listen to them. And with Bob, it was sitting down for a lunch or a walk around the couple of blocks near his home or different things these last few years. One brief memory. There we go. At the reunion. Bob was always involved in our high school reunions and was looking forward to our 55th reunion coming up this fall. And would always ask me, do you need any money? Have we got enough money in the fund? Do we need any help with this? We had a good account because he trained me well to invest it and to always have money. But he was always one to be supportive of that. And demonstrating that back when we were in high school, we were on a double date. And I didn't check out the restaurant in advance. And when we showed up at this pretty fancy Asian restaurant, as I was going in, I could tell I was in trouble. I didn't have the cash. And rather than be embarrassed, I just cornered Bob the side. I said, Bob, can you spot me $5? You know, back then $5 was quite a bit. That was pretty much your dinner, but I hadn't counted on it. And he slipped me a $5, and I was able to cover the cost of my date, and I make up the difference. But he was always like that. His loyalty and such was just superb. He shared with me on one of our last walks together. He said, I wrote it here, the best thing that ever happened to me was Susan. And he believed that. He knew that. And he was always bragging about Gabe and Linnea and their goodness and what they were involved in. We shared great memories and great stories. He will be missed by many of us who knew him well growing up. And it's just been a pleasure to be associated with him and gain from his wisdom and knowledge and experience throughout our lives. Thank you.
Take this off for a sec. I'm George Kellner, and Bob was probably one of my dearest and oldest friends. You know, we grew up together in Rose Park. And I think I really got to know Bob probably in junior high. And we played church basketball, although neither one of us were very churchy.
It's why I joined the church.
Yeah. And I know he kept me from getting killed. You know, church basketball, if you're not familiar with it, is often called blood ball. fights break out all the time, and I was kind of feisty, and I know Bob saved my butt many times from some real big guys that would have really annihilated me. Another memory of Bob was he was always there to help out whenever. Well, let me go for an earlier one. High school, a couple things. I played on that infamous football team where we all built a lot of character. 0 and 9. I was a year behind Bob, so I always rubbed in his nose that my senior year, we went like 8 and 2. You know, we won a lot, so it was the character that was built on Bob's shoulders, I think, that got us there. Also, another high school story, I remember Bob and I dated the same girl at the same time without really knowing it. Yeah. Her name was Jennifer, and she was just a beauty, a smart girl, beautiful. And one day I discovered, Bob, who are you? This is well before you, Susan. So, who are you dating? And he said, oh, this girl named Jennifer. Whoa. Well, I'm dating this girl named Jennifer, too. Turned out to be the same Jennifer. So, same time, almost same days sometimes we went out. So that's another memory. Bob and I, when Bob was kind of his own boss, and I had a job where I worked sort of swing shifts, so I had a lot of days free, and so I spent a lot of those days with Bob. We'd play tennis, we'd jog up City Creek Canyon. Bob and I entered the Deseret News No Champs, which used to be a big deal, if some of you may remember. Thousands of people entered that, and Bob and I were doubles partners, and we entered it kind of on a lark, because we weren't really that good. And we ended up dinking the ball into the semifinals. We beat some really good tennis players. And so that was a good memory. So many others that, I could go on and on, but, Bob is going to be missed dearly by all of us, and particularly Kathy and I. He's been such a good friend, always lend a helping hand when we needed it. So, Bob, rest in peace. We'll never forget you. Thanks.
Well, folks, continue to share these great memories of Bob. What a great guy. And enjoy yourselves and celebrate his life. And that's what we're here for. Thank you.